ND mirrors. The silk of her wedding dress whispered against her skin as she shifted her weight, a nervous habit she had developed over the past week. She looked down at the fabric, intricate lace that her mother had chosen and tried to find the excitement that should have been flooding her veins. Instead, there was a cold knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, unrelated to the pregnancy. "Are you ready?" Elena, her maid of honor, Sarah, asked softly, adjusting the veil that cascaded down Elena's back. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears, convinced this was the happiest day of her friend's life. Elena forced a smile, hoping it reached her eyes. "I think so," she replied, her voice sounding thinner than she intended. She took a deep breath, inhaling the wax and flowers, trying to anchor herself. "It's just a ceremony, Sarah. It's about family. It's about safety." She repeated the words like a mantra. She wanted this marriage to be a fortress for her child. She wanted Marcos to be the wall that kept the world's chaos away. But lately, the wall had felt porous, filled with cracks she was afraid to inspect too closely. The music began, a swelling string quartet that signaled her entrance. The doors groaned open slowly, revealing the vast expanse of the ballroom. It was decorated in themes of gold and ivory, but what struck Elena most was the light. Every table, every ledge, every corner was adorned with open flames. The heat was already palpable, rising in waves that made the air shimmer slightly above the candles. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it felt dangerous, like walking into the heart of a sun that might burn if you got too close. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Guests turned to look, their faces blurring into a mosaic of smiles and whispers. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar, where Marcos stood waiting. Marcos looked handsome in his tailored suit, but as Elena drew nearer, she saw the tension in his jaw. He was not smiling. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles white against the black fabric of his trousers. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, toward the back of the room, as if expecting someone else to walk through those doors. When his eyes finally met hers, there was a flicker of something unreadable. Panic, guilt, it vanished too quickly for her to be sure, replaced by a mask of dutiful affection. He extended his hand as she reached the altar, and when she took it, his palm was damp with sweat. "You look beautiful," he whispered, but the words felt rehearsed, devoid of the warmth that used to define them. "Thank you," she whispered back, squeezing his hand gently, searching for a pulse of reassurance. "I'm nervous, Marcos. Just hold my hand." He nodded, but his grip remained stiff, unyielding. High above in the private balcony that overlooked the main hall, a shadow moved silently. Elena's father, Arthur, stood behind the velvet curtains, unseen by the guests below. He had chosen not to walk her down the aisle, claiming a desire to let her have her moment. But the truth was heavier. He was a man who built empires from nothing, a billionaire who understood risk better than anyone. He had watched Marcos closely for months. He had seen the late nights, the unanswered calls, the subtle changes in his daughter's spirit. He was here not to celebrate, but to protect. From his vantage point, he could see the entire room laid out like a chessboard. He saw the candles, too many for a room of this size, a fire hazard that the planners had ignored in favor of aesthetics. He saw the way Marcos shifted his weight, checking the pocket of his suit jacket where the outline of a phone was visible. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He trusted his daughter's heart, but he did not trust the man she was marrying. He remained still, a silent guardian waiting for the game to begin. Down below, the officiant began to speak, his voice booming through the speakers. "We are gathered here to witness the union of two souls." Elena tried to focus on the words, but the heat in the room was becoming oppressive. The flames from the nearby candelabras flickered violently, though there was no draft. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, a strong, rhythmic thump that reminded her of why she was standing there. She looked at Marcos again. He was distracted. His eyes darted toward the side entrance of the hall, the one that led to the private preparation rooms. Why is he looking there, she wondered. Is someone late, or is someone coming who shouldn't? The thought sent a chill through her despite the rising temperature. She leaned closer to him. "Marcos, is everything okay? You seem distant." He flinched at her touch, then forced a laugh that sounded hollow in the quiet hall. "It's just the heat, Elena. Too many candles. They should have listened to me." His voice carried an edge of irritation that surprised her. "I thought you liked the romantic atmosphere," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I did," he snapped, then softened his tone immediately. "I mean, I do. I'm just anxious. I want this to be perfect. Perfect. The word hung in the air between them. Elena looked around the room again. The perfection felt brittle. The guests were too quiet, the music too loud, the flames too high. She felt exposed, standing in the center of all that fire in a white dress that felt like kindling. She thought about her father, wondering where he was. She wished he were standing beside her now, his broad shoulders blocking the view of the people who stared at her like she was a spectacle. She felt a sudden, irrational urge to run, to grab her dress and flee back through the doors where she had entered. But she stayed. She stayed for the child. She stayed for the promise of safety she had convinced herself this marriage would provide. Marcos shifted again, his hand moving to his pocket. She heard the faint vibration of a phone on silent mode. He didn't take it out, but his thumb brushed over the fabric repeatedly. "Who is texting you during our vows?" Marcos, the question burned in her throat, but she swallowed it. "Not here. Not now." The officiant continued, speaking about trust and fidelity. Elena looked into Marcos's eyes, searching for the man she had fallen in love with 3 years ago. She found traces of him, buried under layers of stress and secrecy. "I promise to honor and protect," Marcos said when it was his turn, his voice steady but lacking conviction. Protect. The word echoed in her mind. Who was he protecting, her or himself, from what the flames on the tables seemed to grow brighter, reflecting in the polished silverware, creating dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands. Elena took a shallow breath. The air tasted of smoke, faint but distinct. She glanced at the nearest table. A candle had tipped slightly in its holder, the wax pooling near the dry fabric of the table runner. No one else seemed to notice. The guests were captivated by the ceremony, by the drama of the moment. But Elena saw it. She saw the potential for disaster lurking in the details. She touched Marcos's arm again. "The candle," she whispered urgently. "It's too close to the cloth." Marcos glanced down, barely registering the danger. "It's fine, Elena. Don't worry about everything. Just focus on us." But how could she focus when the world felt like it was tilting on its axis? She looked up toward the balcony again, sensing a presence. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a silhouette behind the curtains, a familiar shape. Her father, was he watching? The thought gave her a small measure of comfort, a secret knowledge that she was not entirely alone in this hall of strangers and secrets. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. She would not be a victim of her own doubts. She would stand here, in the light and the heat, and she would claim her future. But as the officiant asked for the rings, a shadow passed across the back of the room. The side door creaked open, just a fraction. Marcos's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Elena followed his gaze. The door was dark, but she felt a change in the air pressure, a shift in the room's energy. Someone had entered. Someone who was not on the guest list. The music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the pounding of her own heart. The candles flickered in unison, as if responding to a breath that wasn't there. The ceremony continued, but the illusion of peace had shattered. They were standing on stomach, forming a protective barrier against the unseen threat emanating from the doorway. In the quiet sanctuary of her mind, she retreated to the memories that had sustained her through the long nights of morning sickness and uncertainty. She remembered the day she had told Marcos, the way his eyes had lit up with a joy that she now realized might have been performative. They had sat in the nursery they were preparing together, a room painted in soft yellows and whites, filled with the promise of a future where their child would be safe, loved, and cherished. She had dreamed of a family unit that was unbreakable, a fortress against the loneliness that had plagued her childhood. She wanted her child to know what it felt like to be secure, to never have to look over their shoulder, to trust that the people who claimed to love them would never let harm come close. Marcos did not move to take the ring from the best man. His hand remained suspended in the air, trembling slightly. Elena looked at him, searching for the partner who had promised to be her shelter. "Marcos," she whispered, the microphone picking up the fragility in her voice. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the rupture in the ceremony's flow. "Who is that?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the sliver of darkness where the door had opened. Marcos swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "It's no one," he lied, but the words lacked conviction. They were hollow, empty shells that cracked under the weight of his guilt. Elena felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and stinging. It wasn't just fear, it was the erosion of her dream. She had built this day around the idea that she was choosing a father for her child, a man who would stand between her and the world's cruelties. Now she felt exposed, as if the walls of the fortress she thought she was building were made of paper. The heat in the room seemed to intensify, pressing against her skin. The candles, once romantic, now looked like rows of watching eyes, their flames dancing erratically. Elena took a shallow breath, trying to calm the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She thought about the future she had planned. She had imagined mornings where Marcos would hold the baby while she made coffee. She had imagined teaching their child to walk, to speak, to trust. Those images flashed before her eyes, vibrant and painful. How could those dreams survive if the foundation was rotten? She looked down at her dress, the white silk symbolizing purity and new beginnings. Suddenly, it felt like a shroud. She wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of her father's home, but her feet felt rooted to the marble floor. She was anchored by the life inside her, by the responsibility that outweighed her own desire for escape. She had to stand. She had to know. From the balcony, Arthur watched the scene unfold with a predator's focus. He saw the way his daughter's shoulders hunched, protecting her womb. He saw the sweat beading on Marcos's forehead, not from the heat, but from fear. Arthur's hand tightened on the railing, the metal cold against his palm. He had wanted to stay out of sight, to let Elena have her independence, but the instinct to protect was roaring in his blood. He knew what betrayal looked like. He had seen it in boardrooms and in back alleys. He saw it now in the way Marcos refused to turn around, in the way his eyes darted toward the shadowed figure. Arthur whispered to himself, a vow made in the quiet space above the chaos. He would not let them break her. He would not let them touch the child. He scanned the room, noting the exits, the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls, the potential hazards. His mind was working through scenarios, calculating risks, preparing to intervene the moment the situation tipped from emotional distress to physical danger. Back at the altar, the figure finally stepped into the light. It was a woman, dressed in dark clothing that contrasted sharply with the ivory and gold of the wedding party. She did not look like a guest. She looked like a storm front moving in. Elena's breath hitched in her throat. She recognized the woman, not from memory, but from the late-night phone calls Marcos had taken in the other room, from the smell of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt that he had claimed was from the office. The realization hit Elena with the force of a physical blow. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the podium for support. The officiant stepped back, sensing the danger, his book clutched tightly to his chest. The music had stopped completely now, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the crackle of the candles. Marcos finally turned, facing the woman. "Please," he said, his voice low but carrying in the silence. "Not here. Not today." The woman ignored him. Her eyes were locked on Elena. There was no pity in them, only a cold, hard resolve. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She looked at Marcos, waiting for him to deny it, to send the woman away, to fulfill the vow he was moments away from making. But he stood paralyzed, caught between the life he had promised and the secrets he had kept. Elena placed both hands on her stomach, closing her eyes for a second. "Baby, I'm here," she thought, sending a silent message of reassurance to the child growing within her. "I won't let anything hurt you." When she opened her eyes, the vulnerability was still there, but it was hardened by a new resolve. She was no longer just a bride, she was a mother. The woman took another step forward, her heels clicking on the floor. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet hall. "You promised me," she said, her voice directed at Marcos but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You said you would fix this. You said you would choose." Elena looked at Marcos, her heart breaking into pieces that felt too sharp to hold. "Choose?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Marcos, what is she talking about?" Marcos opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was trapped in the web of his own making. The candles on the nearest table flickered violently, the flames stretching upward as if drawn by a sudden draft. The wax began to drip faster, pooling on the tablecloth. Elena noticed it again, the danger lurking in the decor. The beauty of the room was becoming a trap. She thought about the nursery again, the crib they had assembled together, the mobile that spun slowly above it. She had wanted those things to be symbols of love. Now they felt like reminders of lies. She felt a surge of anger, hot and bright, cutting through the fear. She would not let this woman or this man define her future. She would not let them take the safety she deserved for her child. She straightened her back, pulling away from the podium. She stood tall, her white dress glowing in the candlelight. "If you have something to say," Elena said, her voice gaining strength, "say it. But know this. You are speaking to a mother. The woman paused, surprised by the shift in Elena's demeanor. The guests watched, held captive by the drama. The air was thick with tension, ready to snap. Arthur, above, leaned forward, his hand moving toward the door that led to the stairs. He was ready to descend. The moment of truth had arrived, and the fire that threatened to consume them all was not just in the candles, but in the words "speak." He wanted to tell her the truth, to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. But the words were lodged in his throat, blocked by shame and a cowardice he had never acknowledged until this moment. He had told himself he was protecting her, that he was trying to find a gentle way to end his entanglement with Clara. But standing here now, he realized he had only been protecting himself. He wanted the stability Elena offered, the respectability of the family her father represented, but he also wanted the passion Clara claimed to embody. He wanted both, and in wanting both, he had endangered everything. "Please, Marcos," Elena said again, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence louder than a shout. "Tell me she is wrong. Tell me to send her away." She took a step toward him, ignoring the woman in the shadows, focusing all her energy on the man she had chosen. Her hands were still clasped over her stomach, an instinctive shield against the emotional barrage. "I need you to speak. I need you to be the father of this child right now." The plea hung in the air, desperate and raw. Marcos opened his mouth, but what came out was a stuttered breath. He looked at Clara, then back at Elena, his eyes darting like a trapped animal seeking an exit. He was not a villain in his own mind. He was a man overwhelmed, a man who had let situations spiral out of control until he lost the steering wheel. But to Elena, his hesitation was an answer. It was a confirmation of every fear she had suppressed during the late nights and the quiet mornings. Clara stepped fully into the light, her face pale and streaked with mascara. She was not triumphant, she was desperate. "You think I wanted this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You think I wanted to come here and destroy her day?" She pointed a shaking finger at Elena. "He promised me, Elena. He promised me we would be together. He said this marriage was a mistake." She turned her glare on Marcos. "Tell her, Marcos. Tell her you don't love her. Tell her you love me." The demand was toxic, filling the room with a venom that made the guests shift in their seats. Some stood up, unsure whether to intervene or watch the drama unfold. The heat from the candles seemed to pulse in time with the rising voices. Marcos shook his head, finally finding his voice, though it was weak. "Clara, stop. This isn't the way. You are hurting them." "Hurting them?" Clara laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "You are hurting them. You brought her here. You stood her in front of all these people while you were still mine." Elena felt a wave of nausea roll over her. The room was spinning. The faces of the guests blurred into a swirl of judgment and pity. She looked at Marcos, waiting for him to defend her, to step between her and the woman who was tearing their life apart. But he remained rooted to the spot, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He was paralyzed by the conflict, torn between the woman who claimed his past and the woman who held his future. In that paralysis, he was choosing neither. He was choosing only his own safety, his own inability to face the consequences of his actions. Elena felt a tear spill over, hot and heavy. It wasn't just sadness, it was the death of trust. She had built her world around the idea that he was her protector. Now, she realized she was standing alone in a room full of fire. Arthur, watching from the balcony, gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. He saw his son-in-law's failure clearly. He saw the way Marcos shrunk away from Elena's plea. He saw the way he refused to confront Clara. It was a display of weakness that disgusted him. Arthur had built his life on making hard decisions, on protecting what was his. He saw Elena trembling below, a solitary figure in white against the darkness of the betrayal. He prepared to move, his muscles coiled, ready to descend the stairs and remove the threat himself. But he waited one moment longer, hoping against hope that Marcos would finally step up. Hope was a dangerous thing, Arthur knew, but a father's heart clung to it even when logic dictated otherwise. The air in the ballroom grew heavier, the oxygen seeming to vanish under the pressure of the confrontation. Clara moved closer to the altar, her movements erratic, fueled by adrenaline and heartbreak. She reached out, grabbing Marcos's arm. "Come with me," she demanded. "Leave this. Leave her. It's not too late." Marcos tried to pull away, but the physical contact sparked a chain reaction. In his struggle to free himself, he bumped into the large candelabra standing beside the podium. It wobbled, the metal screeching against the wood. Elena gasped, reaching out to steady it, but she was too slow. The structure tipped. Flames licked outward, catching the dry fabric of the table runner instantly. The fire spread with terrifying speed, fueled by the alcohol-based polish on the wood and the dry silk of the decorations. A column of fire rose between Elena and Marcos, separating them physically just as they had been separated emotionally. The heat was immediate and intense, washing over Elena's face. She stumbled back, her hands flying to cover her face, but her primary instinct was to protect her abdomen. She turned away from the flames, coughing as smoke began to billow into the air. The guests screamed, chairs scraping against the floor as panic erupted. The orderly ceremony dissolved into chaos. Marcos stared at the fire, shocked into stillness once again. He saw the flames, but he did not move toward Elena. He was frozen by the spectacle of his own making. He watched the fire grow, mesmerized by the destruction, while the woman he had vowed to protect stood inches away from the danger. Elena coughed, the smoke stinging her eyes. She looked at Marcos through the haze, waiting for him to come to her, waiting for him to be the husband he was supposed to be. But he stood still, his face pale, his hands shaking at his sides. In that moment, amidst the heat and the smoke, Elena understood the true depth of his distance. It was not just emotional, it was physical. He would not save her. He would not risk himself. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the air like deadly fireflies. The heat was becoming unbearable. Elena felt the singe of the fire near the hem of her. Blurred, tears streaming down her cheeks mixing with the soot. She felt a profound sense of isolation. The guests were gone. Her husband was gone. The woman who had claimed him was gone. She was alone with the fire. But she was not alone. The baby kicked again, a strong, defiant movement that reminded her of her purpose. She was not just Elena the bride. She was a mother. And a mother did not stay on the floor when danger approached. She grabbed the hem of her dress, tearing the silk to free her legs. The sound of ripping fabric was loud in the empty room, a sharp contrast to the crackling fire. She pushed herself up, her legs shaking beneath her weight. The heat was intense, singeing the edges of her veil. She needed to move. She needed to find air. She took a step, then another, moving away from the altar, away from the source of the fire. But the smoke was disorienting. The exit seemed to shift in her blurred vision. She stumbled, catching herself on a chair. Her lungs burned. She called out, but her voice was weak. "Help," she whispered. "Is anyone there above?" Arthur heard the cry. It was faint, carried up the stairwell on the currents of hot air. He was halfway down now, his movements precise and urgent. He had shed his suit jacket, leaving him in his shirt sleeves, ready for action. He carried a fire extinguisher he had grabbed from the wall on the upper level. He knew the layout of the building. He had approved the plans for the renovation years ago. He knew where the exits were. He knew where the hazards lay. He moved with the confidence of a man who had faced crises before and survived. He was not panicked. He was focused. His only thought was his daughter. His only goal was her safety. Clara heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs. She looked up, her eyes widening. Someone was coming. Not the firefighters, not yet. Someone from inside. She grabbed Marcos's shoulder, shaking him. "We need to leave. Now. If her father finds us here." She didn't finish the sentence. The threat was implicit. Arthur Vance was not a man who forgave easily. If he found them hiding while his daughter was in danger, there would be no hiding place on earth safe enough for them. Marcos stood up, wiping his face. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice devoid of hope. "Away," Clara said simply. "As far as we can." They turned to run, but the sound of the stairwell door opening froze them. Arthur stepped into the hallway. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at Marcos. His eyes swept past them, assessing them as obstacles, as irrelevant details in the face of the emergency. He saw the smoke coming from the ballroom doors. He saw the fear on their faces. He saw the guilt. He filed it all away for later. There would be time for justice. There would be time for consequences. But right now there was only rescue. "Move," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my way." Clara instinctively stepped aside, pressed against the wall by the sheer force of his presence. Marcos did the same. They were nothing compared to the fury of a father protecting his child. Arthur pushed open the ballroom doors. The heat hit him like a wall, but he did not flinch. He scanned the room, his eyes cutting through the smoke. He saw the fire spreading near the altar. He saw the empty chairs. And he saw Elena, standing unsteadily near the side of the room, trying to navigate through the haze. Relief washed over him, sharp and sudden, but he did not stop. He moved toward her, the fire extinguisher ready in his hand. Elena saw him through the smoke. Her father. The silhouette was unmistakable. She felt a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed. She reached out a hand toward him. "Dad," she called out, her voice stronger now. Arthur reached her in seconds. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her weight, and guided her toward the exit. He used the extinguisher to clear a path through the smaller flames blocking their way, the white powder mixing with the smoke. "You are safe," he said, his voice steady against her ear. "I have you. I've got you." Elena leaned into him, letting him bear her weight. The fear began to recede, replaced by the solid certainty of his protection. Behind them, the fire continued to burn, consuming the decorations, the vows, the lies. But they were moving away from it. They were moving toward the fresh air, toward the truth, toward a future that did not include the man who had left her behind. Clara and Marcos watched them leave from the hallway. They were alone now, in the quiet corridor, while the alarm systems began to blare, signaling the arrival of the fire department. The sound was deafening, a siren song of consequences. Clara looked at Marcos. He was looking at the closed doors where Elena had disappeared. He looked broken. She realized then that her plan had succeeded in the worst way possible. She had destroyed the wedding. She had destroyed the marriage. But she had not won. There was nothing left to win. The fire had burned strobing colors. He kept his arm firmly around her waist, his body acting as a shield against the crowd of onlookers who had gathered behind the security barriers. Elena's legs felt like water, each step a struggle against gravity, but her father's strength was an anchor she clung to with desperate gratitude. She could hear the sirens wailing in the distance, joining the chorus of alarms that seemed to ring inside her own head. The smoke still clung to her hair, smelling of burnt wax and destroyed dreams, but the oxygen was clean here. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach. "Is the baby okay?" she asked, her voice raspy from the smoke. The question was the only one that mattered. The wedding, the dress, the guests, the husband who had vanished into the shadows. None of it existed compared to the life growing inside her. Arthur stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. He looked into her eyes, his expression softening from the fierce protector to the loving father. "We are going to make sure," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I have the best doctors waiting. You are both going to be safe. I promise you, Elena. No one will touch you again." The promise hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his influence and his wrath. Elena nodded, tears finally spilling over freely now that the immediate danger had passed. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the rhythm of safety, the sound she had needed all night. Paramedics rushed toward them, a stretcher in hand. Arthur waved them closer, but maintained his position beside Elena. "She is pregnant," he told them, his tone leaving no room for question or delay. "Priority 1. The medics nodded, respecting the authority in his voice. They helped Elena onto the stretcher, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. As they lifted her, she looked back at the building. Flames were now visible through the high windows, licking at the sky. The beautiful hall, the place where she had hoped to start her family, was being consumed. It felt like a metaphor she couldn't escape. Her marriage was burning, just as surely as the drapes. She closed her eyes as the ambulance doors shut, shutting out the sight of the destruction. Inside the ambulance, the lights were bright and clinical. The beeping of the monitor was a steady, rhythmic sound that calmed her frayed nerves. A paramedic placed an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth. "Just breathe, ma'am," the woman said kindly. "We're taking you to St. Mary's. They have a specialized unit ready." Elena nodded, her hand finding her stomach again. She felt a movement, a small shift. The baby was still there. A sob caught in her throat, relieved and painful all at once. She thought of Marcos. Where was he? Was he safe? The thought surprised her. Even after he had left her behind, even after he had frozen while the fire spread, her first instinct was to worry for him. But then she remembered the look in his eyes. The cowardice. The way he had let Clara pull him away. The worry faded, replaced by a cold, hard realization. He had chosen. He had chosen himself. While Elena was being rushed through the city streets, Marcos and Clara were hiding in the shadows of a parking garage 3 blocks away. The sirens were louder here, echoing off the concrete walls. Marcos sat on the cold ground, his head in his hands. His suit was stained with soot, his tie loosened and askew. He looked nothing like the groom who had stood at the altar an hour ago. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Clara paced back and forth, her phone clutched in her hand. "We need to go," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't be here. If her father finds us." "He won't find us," Marcos muttered, not looking up. "He doesn't know where we are." "He knows," Clara snapped. "He knows everything. You think he didn't see us, you think he didn't see you leave her there." She stopped pacing and looked down at him. "What did you do, Marcos? You let her burn." The accusation hung between them, toxic and undeniable. "I didn't let her burn," Marcos defended weakly. "The fire, it was too much. I couldn't." "You couldn't what save her?" Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I came here to win you back. I thought you loved me, but you don't love anyone. You only love yourself." She shook her head, disgust evident in her expression. "I made a mistake. We both did." She turned and began to walk away toward the exit of the garage. "Where are you going?" Marcos asked, looking up, panic in his eyes. "Away," Clara said without looking back. "Don't call me. Don't try to find me. This is over." She disappeared into the night, leaving him alone in the concrete silence. Marcos watched her go, realizing that in his attempt to keep both women, he had lost both. He was alone with the consequences of his actions, and he knew that Arthur Vance would not be far behind. At the hospital, the staff moved with efficient precision. Arthur had made calls before the ambulance even arrived. The best obstetrician in the city was waiting in the emergency room. Elena was wheeled into a private room, the lights dimmed to reduce her stress. Arthur stood by the door, watching as the doctor performed the ultrasound. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the machine and the doctor's soft murmurs. Elena watched the screen, her heart pounding in her throat. She needed to see it. She needed to know. "There it is," the doctor said, pointing to the flickering image on the monitor. "Strong heartbeat. Baby is stable. You were very lucky, Miss Vance." The correction was subtle but significant. Elena felt a wave of relief, so profound it made her dizzy. "She's okay," she whispered. "She's okay." Arthur let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the fire started. He walked to the bedside and took Elena's hand. "She is strong, like her mother," he said softly. "And like her father." Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions. "Dad, where is Marcos?" Arthur's expression hardened slightly, but he kept his voice gentle. "He is not here, Elena. He left the scene." He was seen leaving with the woman who started the confrontation. Elena closed her eyes. The confirmation hurt, but it also clarified things. The fog of denial that had clouded her mind for weeks was burned away by the fire. "He left me," she said, her voice flat. "He left us." Arthur squeezed her hand. "He made his choice. Now you must make yours. You do not have to go back to that life. You do not have to forgive him. You have a right to protect yourself and this child." Elena looked at the ultrasound image again. The tiny flicker of life was the only truth that mattered. "I won't go back," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I can't trust him. Not after this." Arthur nodded. "Then we will handle it. Legally. Completely. You will never have to see him again if you don't want to." The night stretched on, the hospital room becoming a sanctuary away from the chaos of the wedding. Elena drifted in and out of sleep, her body exhausted from the adrenaline and the smoke. Arthur remained in the chair beside her bed, a silent sentinel. He watched her breathe, ensuring she was safe. His mind was already working on the next steps. He would secure evidence. He would ensure Clara faced charges for the fire. He would ensure Marcos faced the consequences of his abandonment. But for now, his only role was father. He watched the rise and fall of Elena's chest, grateful that the tragedy had not been worse. He thought about the man Marcos had been, or rather, the man he had pretended to be. It was a lesson learned too late, but Elena was safe. That was the only victory that counted. Morning began to break outside the window, the gray light of dawn filtering through the blinds. Elena woke up, feeling stiff but alive. The pain in her chest was emotional, a heavy weight that sat over her lungs, but physically she was healing. She looked at her father, who was dozing in the chair. She didn't want to wake him, but she needed to speak. "Dad," she said softly. Arthur woke instantly, his eyes alert. "I'm here," he said. "I'm thinking," Elena said, looking out the window at the city waking up. "I'm thinking about what comes next. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want this to be the story of my life." Arthur sat up straighter. "It won't be. You are a survivor." Elena turned to look at him. "Then help me build something new. Something that doesn't depend on him." Something that is just us. And the baby. Arthur smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Anything, Elena. Whatever you need. The world is yours. The phone on the bedside table buzzed. Arthur looked at it. It was Marcos. He had finally found the courage to call. Arthur looked at Elena. Do you want to take this? Elena looked at the phone, then at her stomach. She thought about the fire, the smoke, the feeling of being left behind. She thought about the future, about raising her child without fear. No, she said firmly. Don't let him call again. Block the number. Arthur nodded and silenced the phone. The connection was severed. The marriage was effectively over, ended not by a divorce paper, but by a fire that had revealed the truth. Elena lay back down, closing her eyes. The road ahead would be long. There would be legal battles, there would be gossip, there would be pain. But she was not alone. She had her father. She had her child. And she had herself. The chair by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. He had been speaking in low, controlled tones for the last hour, his voice a stark contrast to the turmoil that had engulfed them. Elena watched him, marveling at the calm authority he radiated. He was building a wall around her, brick by legal brick, ensuring that nothing from the outside could penetrate this sanctuary. When he finally hung up, he turned to look at her. His eyes were tired but sharp. The doctors say you can go home tomorrow, he said, standing up and walking to her bedside. They want to keep you overnight for observation, just to be sure about the smoke inhalation. Elena nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Home, she repeated, testing the word. Her apartment felt like a memory from a different life. The house she had planned to share with Marcos felt like a crime scene. I don't know if I can go back there, Dad. Not to that house. Arthur shook his head immediately. You won't. I've already arranged for a suite at the peninsula. You'll stay there until we find something permanent. Something secure. He paused, his expression softening. You don't have to worry about logistics, Elena. Just focus on healing. Elena looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly, a residual effect of the adrenaline that had coursing through her veins. What about Marcos, she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. She didn't want to care, but the habit of years was hard to break. Arthur's jaw tightened. He is irrelevant now. His lawyers contacted me an hour ago. They are trying to arrange a meeting. They want to discuss damages, public relations. Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. Public relations. He almost lost you. He left you in a burning room. There is no gun strategy that fixes that. Elena closed her eyes. She could picture Marcos's face as he had backed away, the fear in his eyes that had been stronger than his love for her. It hurt more than the smoke had. He was scared, she whispered, though she knew it was a weak excuse. Everyone is scared, Arthur said firmly. But love is what you do when you are scared. He did nothing. That tells me everything I need to know. Across the city, in a dimly lit hotel room, Marcos sat on the edge of the bed. His suit was wrinkled, stained with soot that he hadn't bothered to clean. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was his lawyer. He stared at it, feeling a sense of dread settle in his stomach. He knew what the call would be about. He picked it up, his hand shaking. They are filing, the lawyer said without preamble. Arthur Vance is not playing around. Criminal negligence, endangerment, abandonment. They have the security footage from the hall, Marcos. They have witnesses. Marcos put his head in his hands. What do I do? He asked, his voice cracking. You stay silent, the lawyer advised. Do not contact her. Do not contact the father. Let us handle the damage control. But there is no control, Marcos thought. The damage was done. He looked around the empty room. Clara was gone. Elena was gone. He was alone with the silence and the guilt. He remembered the heat of the fire, the way the smoke had choked the air. He remembered Elena's voice calling his name. He had chosen self-preservation, and now he had to live with the cost. Back in the hospital, Arthur pulled a tablet from his bag. I want to show you something, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He tapped the screen and turned it toward Elena. It was a security feed from the ballroom, paused on the moment the fire started. You can see her, Arthur said, pointing to the figure of Clara. She knocked over the candelabra. It wasn't an accident, Elena. It was intentional. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected it, but seeing the cold calculation in the video made it real. She wanted to hurt me, Elena said, her voice quiet. She wanted to hurt us. Arthur nodded. She will be charged with arson and attempted murder. And Marcos, Elena asked. Arthur swiped the screen to another clip. This is him, leaving the room while you were on the floor. He didn't call for help. He didn't try to put out the fire. He ran. Elena felt a tear slide down her cheek. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a final severing of a tie. He didn't love me, she said. Not enough. Arthur took her hand. He didn't deserve you. None of them do. You have me. And you have this baby. That is all that matters. The afternoon passed slowly. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting IVs. Elena drifted into a light sleep, haunted by dreams of smoke and shadows. When she woke, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that reminded her too much of the fire. Arthur was still there, working on his laptop. He looked up when she stirred. Hungry, he asked. I can have them bring something up. Just water, Elena said. Her throat was still sore. She sat up, wincing slightly. Dad, what happens now? Arthur said, closing the laptop. We build a life that is safe. I have a team going through all of Marcos's financials. There were irregularities, transfers to Clara's account. He was using you, Elena. Using us. The revelation didn't shock her as much as it should have. It fit the pattern. The distance, the secrets, the hesitation. It was all part of a transaction he had been making behind her back. I feel stupid, Elena admitted, looking at her father. I should have seen it. Arthur shook his head vigorously. No, you loved him. That is not stupidity. That is capacity. He was the one who was broken, not you. Do not let his failure become your shame. Elena absorbed his words, letting them sink into the cracks of her broken confidence. She thought about the future. She had planned to be a wife, a partner. Now she would be a single mother, a daughter, a survivor. It was a different path than the one she had mapped out, but as she looked at her father, she realized it wasn't a lesser path. It was a stronger one. I want to press charges, Elena said suddenly. Against both of them. I don't want them to get away with this. Arthur smiled, a proud, fierce smile. I knew you would say that. The papers are already drafted. You just need to sign them when you are ready. There is no rush. The evening deepened, and the hospital corridor grew quiet. Elena looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Marcos was facing the ruin of his life. Somewhere, Clara was facing the law. But in here, it was quiet. The beep of the monitor was steady. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of the future. Elena placed her hand over her stomach. We are okay, she whispered to the child. We are safe. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, standing beside her. He didn't speak, just stood there as a silent pillar of support. The fire had taken much from her. The wedding, the marriage, the illusion of safety. But it had given her something too. It had burned away the lies. It had shown her who truly stood by her. She leaned her head on her father's shoulder. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for coming. Arthur kissed the top of her head. Always, Elena. Always. The night settled around them, no longer threatening, but protective. The storm had passed, and though the wreckage was vast, the foundation remained. And on that foundation, they soothing, a gentle tapping that contrasted with the storm raging within Elena's mind. She sat propped up against the pillows, the white sheets pulled up to her chest, her hand resting constantly on the curve of her abdomen. Arthur had stepped out briefly to take another call, leaving her alone with the hum of the medical equipment and the silence of the room. In the quiet, the memories of the confrontation began to surface, unbidden and sharp. She closed her eyes and saw Clara's face again, not as she was in the video, but as she had been in those final moments before the fire started. The words they had exchanged echoed in her mind, clearer now than they had been in the chaos of the moment. When Arthur returned, he carried a thick manila folder in his hand. He closed the door softly behind him, locking it with a deliberate click that signaled a shift in the atmosphere. He looked at Elena, his expression grave. I have more, he said, walking to the bedside table and setting the folder down. The security team recovered deleted messages from Marcos's phone. Cloud backups. They didn't think we would look there. Elena felt a coldness spread through her chest, colder than the air-conditioned room. What kind of messages, she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Arthur opened the folder and slid a printed transcript across the table toward her. Plans, he said simply. Dates. Locations. They discussed this, Elena. The wedding. The fire. It wasn't just an affair. It was a strategy. Elena stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the lines of text. The timestamps were from weeks ago. Messages between Marcos and Clara. We need to end this cleanly, one message from Marcos read. She needs to sign the prenup before the wedding, another from Clara. If there is an incident, She will be too unstable to fight. Elena's breath hitched. An incident. They were talking about the fire. They were talking about breaking her mind before they even broke her heart. She felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She would not be sick. She would not give them the satisfaction of weakening her further. She looked up at her father, her eyes dry and hard. "They wanted to make me look crazy," she said, her voice steady, "so that when I spoke the truth, no one would believe me." Arthur nodded, his jaw tight. "That was the plan. But they failed. They underestimated you. And they underestimated me." Elena picked up the paper, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the evidence of her own destruction. She thought about the confrontation again, the moment Clara had stepped into the light. "You think I wanted this," Clara had said. But looking at the messages now, Elena realized that Clara had wanted exactly this. The chaos, the drama, the reclaiming of Marcos. It was a performance, and Elena had been the intended victim in the script. She felt a surge of anger, hot and clean, burning away the last remnants of her grief for the marriage. There was nothing to mourn. The man she thought she loved had never existed. He was a construct, a role played by someone who valued his own safety over her life. She folded the paper slowly, creasing it down the middle. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Arthur said, sitting in the chair beside her, "we take this to the district attorney. Arson. Conspiracy. Endangerment. They will not walk away from this, Elena. I promise you." The rain outside intensified, drumming against the window pane. Elena looked at the sound, finding a rhythm in it that helped her organize her thoughts. She thought about the baby again. This child would never know the man who had planned to harm its mother. This child would never know the fear of being unwanted. "I want to be there," Elena said suddenly. "When they are charged. I want to look them in the eye." Arthur hesitated, his protective instinct flaring. "It will be difficult," he warned. "The courtroom is not a safe place. It can be aggressive." "I don't care," Elena said firmly. She pulled the blanket tighter around her. "They tried to burn me. They tried to burn us. I need them to see that I am still here. That we are still here." Arthur studied her face, seeing the steel that had formed beneath the vulnerability. He nodded slowly. "If that is what you need, I will arrange it. But only if the doctors clear you. Only if you are strong enough." "I am strong enough," Elena said. "I have to be." Arthur reached out and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm, rough from years of work, a stark contrast to the sterile coolness of the hospital. "You are the strongest person I know," he said softly. "But you do not have to carry this alone. That is what I am here for. Let me carry the weight of the anger for a while. You focus on the baby. Focus on healing." Elena leaned her head back against the pillow, exhaustion finally catching up to her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the fire and the initial shock was fading, leaving a deep ache in her bones. "I'm tired, Dad," she admitted, her voice small again. "I'm so tired of fighting." "I know," Arthur said. "Rest now. The battle will wait until morning. The lawyers will wait. The world will wait." He stood up and dimmed the lights in the room, leaving only the soft glow of the hallway filtering through the door. Elena closed her eyes, but sleep did not come immediately. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the moments of terror mixed with the moments of rescue. She thought about Marcos one last time. She wondered where he was, if he was sleeping, if he was feeling the weight of what he had done. She hoped he was feeling something. Not pain, but regret. A genuine, crushing regret that would force him to look at himself and see the cowardice that lived there. She deserved that much. She deserved to know that her loss was his gain in nothing. She had lost a husband, but she had gained her life. He had kept his freedom, but he had lost his soul. The distinction mattered. It mattered more than anything else. The nurse came in quietly to check the monitors, her footsteps soft on the tile floor. She adjusted the 4-drip and checked Elena's vitals, smiling reassuringly before slipping back out into the night. Elena watched the door close, feeling the safety of the locked room. She was protected here. The walls were thick, the security was tight, and her father was sitting just outside in the waiting area, a guardian dragon who would breathe fire on anyone who tried to cross the threshold. She placed both hands on her stomach, feeling the baby move again, a slow, rolling motion that felt like a promise. "We are going to be okay," she whispered into the quiet room. "We are going to be more than okay. We are going to be free." Arthur sat in the waiting area, the folder open on his lap. He reviewed the documents again, memorizing the details, preparing for the battles ahead. He knew the legal system was slow, often frustratingly so. He knew Marcos's family had money, though not as much as his own. They would try to delay, to settle, to bury the scandal. He would not let them. He would drag the truth into the light, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for them to hide. He thought about Elena sleeping in the room behind him. She had suffered enough. She deserved a future without fear. He made a silent vow to ensure that future was secured, no matter the cost. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, but some stains, he knew, could never be removed. They could only be covered by justice. Inside the room, Elena drifted into a shallow sleep. Her dreams were not of fire this time, but of water. Cool, clear water that extinguished the flames and washed away the smoke. She walked through a forest that was green and alive, the air fresh and sweet. She was not alone. Her father walked beside her, and in her arms she carried the child. They walked toward a horizon that was bright with the morning sun. There were no shadows there, no secrets, no lies, just the open road and the certainty of safety. When she woke hours later, the rain had stopped. The sky outside was a pale gray, signaling the approach of dawn. Arthur was back in the chair, asleep with the folder still on his lap. Elena watched him for a moment, feeling a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought her to tears. He had saved her, not just from the fire, but from the life she had been willing to accept. She reached for the call button on the bedside table, but stopped. She let him sleep. He needed the rest as much as she did. She looked down at the folder on his lap, the edge of the papers visible. The evidence of the betrayal. The proof of the confrontation that had nearly killed her. She did not look away. She stared at it, acknowledging its presence. It was part of her story now, but it was not the end of the story. It was the turning point. The moment where the victim became the survivor. The moment where the silence was broken. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, filtered air of the hospital room. The day was coming. The lawyers would arrive. The statements would be given. The process would begin. She was ready. She lifted her hand and touched the screen of her quietly into his phone. He ended the call and turned to her, his face set in lines of grim determination. "They're coming," he said. "The police and the lawyers. They need to take your statement formally." Elena nodded, pulling her hair back from her face. She felt fragile, like porcelain that had been glued back together, but she knew she had to hold. "I am ready," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. The knock on the door was soft but authoritative. Arthur opened it to reveal two uniformed officers and a woman in a sharp business suit. "Detective Miller," Arthur said, stepping aside to let them in. "This is my daughter, Elena Vance." The detective nodded respectfully, sensing the gravity of the situation. The woman in the suit introduced herself as Ms. Sterling, the prosecutor assigned to the case. They set up a small table near the bed, placing recording equipment and stacks of paper onto the surface. The room shrank around them, the medical beeping becoming a backdrop to the legal machinery starting to grind into motion. Elena looked at the papers. They were thick, filled with dense text that outlined crimes she still struggled to comprehend. Arson, endangerment, conspiracy. Ms. Sterling spoke softly, her voice professional but not unkind. "We need to go over the events of last night, Elena. I know this is difficult, but your testimony is crucial." Elena took a deep breath. She looked at her father, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. She began to speak. She described the confrontation, the words Clara had said, the look in Marcos's eyes. She described the heat, the smoke, the moment she realized she was alone. Her voice did not break, but the emotion hung heavy in the air. The officers listened intently, their pens moving across notepads. When she finished, there was a silence. Detective Miller closed his notebook. "Thank you, Ms. Vance. We have enough to proceed. We will be issuing warrants immediately." Elena felt a weight lift from her chest, just slightly. It was happening. They were being held accountable. While the interview took place, the atmosphere in the hospital corridor was tense. Marcos had arrived. He had heard through the gossip mills that Elena was at St. Mary's. He stood at the nurse's station, looking disheveled and desperate. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "I need to see her," he told the nurse, his voice pleading. "She is my wife. I need to know she is." "Okay." The nurse looked at him with suspicion. She had seen the news reports starting to trickle out about the wedding fire. She checked the chart. "Mr. Vance," she asked. "Yes," Marcos said. The nurse shook her head. "There is a hold on her room. No visitors without explicit permission from Mr. Arthur Vance or the patient." Marcos slammed his hand on the counter. "This is ridiculous. She is my wife. I have a right. Arthur stepped out of the room just as Marcos raised his voice. He walked down the hallway, his presence commanding immediate silence. The nurses stepped back. The security guards moved closer. Arthur stopped in front of Marcos, looking down at him with cold disdain. "You have no rights here," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "You lost them when you walked away." Marcos flinched. "I made a mistake, Arthur. I was scared. I panicked. Let me see her. Let me explain." Arthur shook his head slowly. "There is nothing to explain. You left a pregnant woman in a burning room. You conspired to harm her. The police are inside taking her statement now." Marcos's face went pale. "The police," he whispered. "You called the police. I didn't call them," Arthur said. "The fire did. The evidence did. You did." Marcos took a step forward, desperation overriding his sense of self-preservation. "She won't listen to you, Arthur. She loves me. She will forgive me." Arthur laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the corridor. "You do not know her at all. She is stronger than you could ever imagine. And she is done with you." He signaled to the security guards. "Escort him out. If he returns, he is to be arrested for trespassing." Marcos resisted for a moment, shouting Elena's name. "Elena, please. I love you." The sound penetrated the closed door of the hospital room. Elena flinched, her hand pausing over the signature line of the document. She looked at the door, then at her father. Arthur met her gaze. "Do not let him in," she said softly. "Not ever." Arthur nodded. He turned back to the door as the guards led Marcos away, his protests fading down the hall. Inside the room, the silence returned, heavier than before. Miss Sterling slid the final document toward Elena. "This is the formal request for prosecution," she said. "Once you sign this, there is no going back. The process will be public. It will be difficult." Elena looked at the pen. It felt heavy in her hand. She thought about the life she had planned. The nursery. The dreams. They were gone, burned away in the heat of the ballroom. But in their place was something else. A resolve. A clarity. She thought about the baby kicking inside her. A reminder of the future that still existed. She dipped the pen and signed her name. The scratch of the ink on paper sounded loud in the quiet room. It was done. Arthur let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is over," he said. "The hard part is done." Elena looked up at him. "Is it?" she asked. "The trial, the memories." Arthur shook his head. "The legal part is just a process. The real healing starts now. You have to let go of the anger eventually. But not today. Today, you be angry. Today, you be strong." Elena nodded, tears finally spilling over again. Not tears of sadness, but of release. She handed the pen back to Miss Sterling. The prosecutor gathered her papers, her expression respectful. "We will keep you updated," she said. "You are safe here. We have officers posted outside. No one will get through." After they left, the room felt empty again, but the threat was gone. The shadows had receded. Elena lay back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over her. The adrenaline of the signing had drained her. Arthur pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. He took her hand in his. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Elena looked at the ceiling. "I am thinking about the fire," she said. "Not the heat, but the light. It showed me everything. It showed me who he was. It showed me who you are." Arthur squeezed her hand. "I will always be here, Elena. You never have to doubt that." "I know," she said. "I know now." She closed her eyes. The sound of the hospital was soothing. The footsteps in the hall were protective, not threatening. Her phone buzzed on the table. Arthur glanced at it. Another message from Marcos. Or maybe Clara. He turned the phone face down. "Do not look," he said. "There is nothing there for you." Elena nodded. "Delete it," she said. "All of them." Arthur picked up the phone and began to block the numbers. One by one, the connections were severed. The digital ties that bound her to the past were cut. She felt lighter. The sun was higher now, warming the floor. The day had truly begun. The night of the fire was over. The day of the aftermath had started. Elena drifted into a light sleep, her hand still resting on her stomach. Arthur watched her breathe, ensuring the rhythm was steady. He thought about the battle ahead. The courts would be difficult. The press would be vultures. But they had the truth. They had the evidence. And they had each other. He looked out the window at the city. Somewhere out there, Marcos was facing the ruin of his life. Somewhere, Clara was facing the law. But in here, there was peace. A fragile, even, the tension of the night slowly releasing from her muscles. Arthur sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew the respite was temporary. The legal machinery was already grinding into motion, and he was the linchpin. He was the one who had seen everything. The title of the man who saved her was secondary to the title of the man who witnessed the crime. Detective Miller knocked softly on the door frame, signaling that it was time. Arthur stood up, smoothing his shirt, and stepped out into the corridor, closing the door gently behind him to keep the noise from waking Elena. The detective led him to a small conference room down the hall, where another officer waited with a recording device. The room was stark, lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Arthur sat at the table, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked at the detective, his eyes clear and unwavering. "You want to know what I saw?" Arthur said. It was not a question. Miller nodded, setting up the recorder. "We need a formal statement, Mr. Vance. For the warrant. For the trial. Everything you saw from the balcony." Arthur took a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a second, transporting himself back to the vantage point above the ballroom. The memory was vivid, burned into his mind as surely as the fire had burned the drapes. "I was behind the curtains," Arthur began, his voice low but resonant. "I wanted to see her happy. I wanted to see if he was worthy." He paused, opening his eyes to look at the detective. He was not worthy. "I saw the woman, Clara, enter the side door. I saw her approach the altar. I saw the argument." Arthur's hands tightened on the table. "I saw her knock over the candelabra. It was not an accident. It was deliberate. She looked at my daughter, and she knocked it over." Miller leaned forward. "Did you see the husband? Did he intervene?" Arthur's jaw tightened. He froze. He saw the fire start. He saw Elena fall. And he walked away. He let her pull him out of the room. The words were heavy, each one a nail in the coffin of Marcos's freedom. Miller nodded, writing quickly. "That is crucial, Mr. Vance. Abandonment in the face of danger. It strengthens the endangerment charge significantly." Arthur leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of the memory. He had stood there, high above, powerless for a split second before he moved. He remembered the surge of adrenaline, the calculation of distance, the decision to break his cover. "I counted the seconds," Arthur said. "From the moment the fire started to the moment I reached her. 40 seconds. He left her there for 40 seconds. And then he kept walking." Miller looked up, his expression grim. 40 seconds in a fire like that. It could have been fatal. "It was intended to be," Arthur replied. "They planned it. The messages prove it. My testimony confirms it. There is no doubt." The detective stopped writing and looked at Arthur with a newfound respect. "We don't often get witnesses with your clarity, Mr. Vance. Usually people are panicked. You were precise." "I had to be," Arthur said. "Panic gets people killed. Focus saves them." While Arthur gave his statement, Elena woke up in the room down the hall. The bed was empty beside her. For a moment, panic seized her chest. "Dad," she called out, her voice raspy. She heard the murmur of voices in the corridor and relaxed slightly. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cold floor. She needed to know what was happening. She needed to know if his words were enough. She stood up, steadying herself against the four-stand. The room spun slightly, but she pushed through the dizziness. She walked to the door and opened it a crack. She could see Arthur through the glass panel of the conference room. He was speaking calmly, but she knew the fury that lay beneath the surface. He was fighting for her with the only weapon he had left: the truth. She sat back on the bed, waiting. The minutes stretched out, each one feeling like an hour. She thought about Marcos again. She wondered if he knew that her father was detailing his cowardice to the police. She wondered if he felt shame. Probably not, she thought. People like him only felt regret when they were caught. The door opened, and Arthur walked back in. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than they had been in the morning. He saw her sitting up and immediately went to her side. "You should be resting," he said softly, helping her lie back down. "I needed to know," Elena said, grabbing his hand. "What did you tell them?" "Everything," Arthur said. "I told them exactly what I saw. I told them he left you. I told her she started the fire. There is no way to twist it, Elena." His word was solid, like stone. Elena exhaled, a long breath she felt she had been holding for days. "So it's done?" she asked. "The legal part is started," Arthur corrected. "There will be hearings. There will be a trial. They will try to say I was mistaken. They will try to say the fire was an accident." Arthur shook his head. "They cannot say that to my face. I was there. I saw the intent. The jury will hear that. Elena looked at him, seeing the resolve in his eyes. It gave her strength. I will be there too, she said. I will tell them too. I know, Arthur said. But my testimony closes the loop. It proves premeditation. It proves abandonment. It proves everything. He squeezed her hand. You do not have to carry the burden of proof alone. I am your witness. I am your shield. The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the hospital floor. A nurse came in to check on Elena, adjusting the four and checking the baby's heartbeat. The sound was strong, a rapid rhythm that filled the room with life. Elena watched the monitor, mesmerized by the green line that danced across the screen. It was the only thing that mattered. The fire, the wedding, the betrayal, they were all background noise to this steady beat. Arthur stood by the window, watching the city below. He was still on guard, even here. He had posted private security at the entrance of the ward. No one would get past them. No reporters, no lawyers, no Marcos. Did you block the numbers? Elena asked quietly. Arthur turned from the window. All of them, he said. His phone, her phone, their families. Anyone connected to them. You are invisible to them now. Elena nodded. Good. I don't want to hear their voices. I don't want to hear their excuses. Arthur walked back to the bed and sat down. You won't, he promised. The system will handle them now. You just focus on getting strong. The trial will be in a few months. By then, you will be ready. By then, the baby will be here. Elena smiled faintly. The baby. She rubbed her stomach. She will never know what happened here, she said. Not the fire. Not the fear. Arthur shook his head. She will know that she was loved. That she was protected. That is what matters. The evening meal arrived, but neither of them had much appetite. Arthur picked at the salad, his mind still working through the legal strategies. Elena pushed the tray away, her stomach too unsettled. The doctor came in shortly after, reviewing the charts. You can go home tomorrow, he said. But you need rest. No stress. Arthur looked at the doctor. I will ensure that, he said. The doctor nodded, used to dealing with powerful families. Just make sure she takes the medication for the smoke irritation. And keep the follow-up appointments. I will, Arthur said. He signed the discharge papers with a flourish, eager to get her out of the sterile environment. As night fell again, the hospital quieted down. The hallway lights dimmed. Elena lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the night shift. She felt safer than she had in months. The uncertainty was gone. The lies were exposed. The truth was on record. She thought about the future. She would have to find a new place to live. She would have to raise her child alone. But she was not alone. She had her father. She had the truth. And she had the justice that was coming. Arthur slept in the chair again, his head resting on his chest. He looked older in the dim light, but also unbreakable. Elena whispered into the darkness. Thank you, Dad, for seeing me, for saving me. Arthur stirred, murmuring in his sleep. Always. The word floated in the room, a promise kept. The fire had taken so much, but it had given them this. A bond forged in survival. A truth that could not be burned. Outside, the city lights twinkled, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded within their walls. But inside room 304, a new story was being written. It was not a story of a wedding. It was not a story of a fire. It was a story of a father and a daughter who stood together against the ashes. And as the night deepened, Elena finally slept without dreaming of flames. She dreamed of a house by the sea, quiet and safe, where the only sound was the waves and the laughter of a child. It was a dream of peace. And for the first time, she knew it was possible. The witness had spoken. The verdict was where she was. The sterile white ceiling, the hum of the monitor, the presence of her father in the chair beside her. She was safe. But today was the day they would leave this sanctuary. The doctor had signed the discharge papers an hour ago, but Arthur had delayed the departure until the security team was fully in place. He was not taking any chances. The hospital was a public place, and news of the wedding fire had begun to leak to the press. There were already cameras gathering near the emergency entrance, vultures waiting for a glimpse of the pregnant bride who had survived the flames. Arthur stood by the window, speaking into his earpiece. His voice was low, a stream of commands that ensured their path would be clear. Elena watched him, marveling at the precision of his protection. He was orchestrating an extraction, not just a discharge. When he turned to her, his expression was calm, but his eyes scanned the room constantly. They are ready, he said. We leave in 10 minutes. There is a private exit through the surgical wing. No press. No public corridors. Elena nodded, swinging her legs out of the bed. She felt stronger than yesterday, but the thought of stepping outside made her stomach tighten. What if they are there, she asked. What if Marcos tries to reach me? Arthur walked to her side and placed a hand on her shoulder. They will not get within 50 feet of you, Elena. I have hired a private security firm. They are ex-military. They know how to handle crowds. And Marcos is under a restraining order. If he comes near, he will be arrested immediately. The nurses came in to help her change. They removed the 4 drip, leaving a small bruise on her hand that looked like a mark of the battle she had fought. Elena dressed in the clothes Arthur had brought, loose, comfortable trousers and a soft sweater that hid the curve of her pregnancy from prying eyes. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was different from the bride who had stood at the altar. There was no veil, no lace, no illusion of perfection. There was only survival. She touched her face, feeling the dryness of her skin from the smoke. I look tired, she said softly. You look alive, Arthur corrected her. That is all that matters. He handed her a pair of dark sunglasses. Put these on. Until we are in the car. They moved through the hospital corridors not as patients, but as a unit. 2 security guards flanked them, their hands near their jackets, eyes scanning every shadow. Arthur walked beside. Elena, his body positioned between her and the wall, a physical barrier against any threat. The silence in the surgical wing was heavy, broken only by the click of their shoes on the linoleum. Elena held her breath as they approached the service elevator. She expected doors to burst open, for cameras to flash, for voices to shout. But the elevator arrived empty. They stepped inside, and the doors closed, sealing them in a metal box of silence. Elena let out the breath she had been holding. Arthur saw the tension in her shoulders. You are doing well, he said. Just a few more minutes. Then you will be in the car. Then you will be home. The service exit opened into a loading dock where 3 black SUVs were waiting, engines running. The windows were tinted dark, hiding the interior from the street. A security guard opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Arthur helped Elena inside, sliding in beside her. The door slammed shut, locking out the world. The interior was cool and quiet. The car moved smoothly, pulling out of the dock and into the flow of traffic. Elena looked out the window. They passed the main entrance of the hospital. A crowd of reporters was gathered there, cameras pointed at the doors, microphones ready. They were shouting questions, hoping for a scandal, hoping for tears. But the car glided past them unnoticed. Elena watched them shrink in the distance. They want a story, she said. They want to know what happened. Let them want, Arthur replied. They will get the story from the police report. Not from you. You do not owe them anything. The drive to the hotel was short, but Elena felt every minute of it. She watched the city pass by, the familiar landmarks looking different in the daylight. She saw the bakery where she and Marcos used to buy coffee. She saw the park where they had walked. Memories tried to surface, painful and sharp, but she pushed them down. Those places belonged to the past. They belonged to the woman who had trusted him. This woman, the one sitting in the armored car, did not trust easily anymore. Arthur noticed her silence. He reached over and took her hand. You are thinking about him, he said. It was not a question. A little, Elena admitted. I am thinking about how easy it was for him to leave. How easy it was for them to plan this. Arthur squeezed her hand. Their ease was their mistake. They thought you were weak. They thought I was distant. They did not know who they were dealing with. Now they know. The SUV pulled up to the side entrance of the Peninsula Hotel. It was not the main lobby, where tourists and guests mingled. It was a private entrance used by dignitaries and celebrities. Security staff were waiting, holding the door open. There were no cameras here. No crowds. Just a quiet, secure path to the elevator. Elena stepped out of the car, the fresh air hitting her face. It smelled of exhaust and city dust, but it also smelled of freedom. She was no longer in the hospital. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was in a neutral zone. Arthur guided her through the lobby, which was empty of guests due to his arrangements. The elevator doors opened immediately. They rode up to the penthouse floor in silence. When the doors opened, they stepped into a private foyer. Arthur unlocked the door to the suite. It was spacious, filled with natural light and soft furniture. There were no candles here. No open flames. Only electric lights that could be controlled with a switch. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the city. From this height, the world looked small. The fire station where the trucks had gone was visible in the distance. The wedding hall was a block away, still cordoned off with yellow tape. She could see the smoke stain on the building from here, a black scar against the brick. It was over. The physical place was ruined, but she was standing above it. Arthur came up behind her. He did not speak, just stood there, letting her look. "This is your space now," he said. "No one enters without your permission. The staff has been vetted. The phones are secure. You can rest here for as long as you need." Elena turned to face him. She felt a sudden wave of emotion, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She had spent so much of her life trying to be independent, trying to prove she didn't need his money or his influence. But now she realized that his power was not a chain, it was a shield. He had used his wealth not to control her, but to save her. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice thick. "For everything. For the car. For the room. For seeing me when no one else did." Arthur pulled her into a hug. He held her carefully, mindful of the baby. "I will always see you, Elena. You are my daughter. Nothing will ever change that." They spent the afternoon settling in. Arthur had had the kitchen stocked with healthy food, things Elena could eat without nausea. He had arranged for a private nurse to come in twice a day to check on the pregnancy. He had thought of everything. Elena sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, watching the news on the muted television. They were talking about the fire. They were showing pictures of the burnt hall. They were speculating about the bride. But they did not have her face. They did not have her voice. She was a ghost in her own story, and that gave her peace. Arthur sat in the armchair opposite her, reviewing documents on his tablet. He looked up occasionally to check on her, a silent rhythm of care. "Do you think they will try to come here?" Elena asked eventually. "The news said Marcos is staying at a hotel downtown." Arthur did not look up from his tablet. "Let him stay there. If he tries to come here, security will handle it. He is being monitored, Elena. His lawyers know that if he violates the order, he goes to jail. He is not stupid enough to try." Elena nodded, but the fear lingered. It would take time to fade. "I just want to sleep," she said, without waking up scared. "You will," Arthur promised. "I will be in the room next door. I am not going anywhere." Elena stood up and walked to the bedroom. The bed was large, covered in white linens that looked clean and safe. She lay down, pulling the covers up to her chin. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the wedding, she did not dream of fire. She dreamed of water, a deep, quiet ocean that washed over the ashes. She dreamed of a house where the doors were locked from the inside, not the outside. She dreamed of a child who knew only love. When she woke, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that were warm but not burning. Arthur was sitting by the bed, reading a book. He looked up when she stirred. "Dinner is ready," he said. "Nothing heavy. Just soup." Elena sat up. She felt hungry. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. Her body was healing. Her mind was beginning to settle. They ate at the small table in the suite. The silence between them was comfortable, not heavy. Arthur talked about mundane things, the weather, the stock market, a book he had read. He kept the conversation light, giving her space to breathe. Elena listened, letting the normalcy wash over her. It was a reminder that life continued. The world did not end because her marriage had. There were still meals. There were still sunsets. There was still tomorrow. When they finished, Arthur cleared the plates. "You should rest again," he said. "Tomorrow we will talk about the future. About the house. About the plans. But tonight, just rest." Elena nodded. She walked back to the bedroom and lay down. She placed her hand on her stomach. The baby moved, a gentle roll that made her smile. "We are safe," she whispered to the child. "We are really safe." The words felt true. The rescue was not just the moment her father pulled her from the flames. It was this: the locked door, the quiet room, the presence of someone who would never leave her behind. The fire had taken her wedding, but it had given her clarity. It had shown her where the true safety lay. It was not in a husband who promised vows he did not mean. It was in a father who acted when it mattered. She closed her eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. The sirens were far away. The cameras were blocked. The past was behind a locked door. She drifted into sleep, not as a victim, but as a survivor. And in the next room, Arthur sat awake, watching faulty air conditioner. Where Elena had her father, Marcos had only the echoing silence of his own choices. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, the plastic key card to the room lying on the nightstand next to a glass of untouched water. The television was on, muted, showing the news coverage of the wedding fire. The images of the burnt ballroom scrolled across the screen, a visual testament to the ruin of his life. His phone buzzed on the table. He jumped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the screen. It was not Elena. It was not her father. It was his lawyer, David. Marcos had been waiting for this call for hours, dreading it with an intensity that made his hands shake. He answered, his voice rough. "David," he asked. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that spoke volumes before a single word was uttered. "Marcos," the lawyer said, his tone professional but laced with warning. "You need to listen to me carefully. Do not leave the city. Do not speak to the press. Do not attempt to contact Elena Vance or her father." Marcos felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "What is happening?" he asked, though he knew. "The warrants were issued an hour ago. Arson. Conspiracy. Endangerment. They are naming you as a co-conspirator, Marcos." The word hit him like a physical blow. Co-conspirator. He stood up, pacing the small room. "That is not true. I did not start the fire. I panicked. I left. But I did not plan it." "The law does not care about panic," David replied coldly. "It cares about actions. You left a pregnant woman in a burning building. Arthur Vance has testimony. He has video. He has messages. You are in a very dangerous position." Marcos stopped pacing. He looked at his reflection in the mirror above the dresser. He looked like a stranger. The man who had stood at the altar yesterday was gone, replaced by someone haggard and fearful. "Arthur has testimony?" Marcos asked. "He was there. He saw everything." The lawyer's voice was sharp. "He saw you walk away, Marcos. He saw you leave her. That is abandonment. That is negligence. That is what they are using to bind you to Clara's crime." Marcos sank back onto the bed. The weight of it was crushing. He had thought he could explain. He had thought he could tell Elena that he was scared, that he had made a mistake, that he loved her. But now the system was moving without him. The narrative was being written by Arthur Vance, and in that story, Marcos was not the husband. He was the accomplice. "What do I do?" he whispered. "You stay put," David said. "I will try to arrange bail if they come for you. But do not expect leniency. The public knows. The police know. Her father knows. You are finished." The line went dead. Marcos lowered the phone. Finished. The word echoed in the empty room. He thought about his career, his reputation, the life he had built. It was all tied to the Vance name, to the connection he had forged through marriage. Without that, he was nothing. Just a man who had run from a fire. He tried to call Clara. He needed to know she was okay. He needed to know that someone was still on his side. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He sent a text. "Where are you? We need to talk." The message remained undelivered, never read. He realized then that she had gone too. Just like Elena. Just like everyone. He was alone in the center of the storm he had helped create. He remembered the heat of the flames. He remembered the look in Elena's eyes when he backed away. It was not anger. It was disappointment. That hurt more than the fear of prison. He had failed her. He had failed his child. He stood up and walked to the window. The motel overlooked a highway, cars streaming by in endless lines of red and white lights. People going home. People safe in their beds. He pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold. He thought about the hotel where Elena was staying. He knew which one. Arthur had not hidden it from the lawyers. He knew she was safe there. He wondered if she was sleeping. He wondered if she was thinking of him. He hoped she was not. He hoped she had forgotten him already. It would be easier for her. He turned away from the window and sat on the floor, leaning against the bed. The carpet smelled of stale smoke, a cruel reminder of the real fire. He closed his eyes and saw the candelabra tipping over. He saw Clara's face. He saw Arthur descending the stairs like an avenger. His phone buzzed again. A news alert. Wedding fire investigation expands. Groom named person of interest. Marcos read the headline 3 times. It was real. It was public. His name was attached to the tragedy. He imagined the colleagues he had worked with reading this. He imagined the friends who had attended the wedding. They would all know now. They would all know he had run. He felt a surge of shame so intense it made him nauseous. He rushed to the small bathroom and retched into the sink, though nothing came up. He splashed water on his face and looked in the mirror again. The eyes staring back were hollow. He had wanted passion. He had wanted excitement. He had wanted Clara. And now he had nothing but ash. He walked back into the room and picked up his wallet. He looked at the photo inside. It was from the engagement party. Elena was smiling, her hand on his arm. She looked happy. She looked trusting. He traced her face with his thumb. "I am sorry," he whispered to the photo. "I am so sorry." But the apology changed nothing. The photo was a relic of a truth that no longer existed. He put the wallet down. He knew he should sleep. He knew he needed to be ready for whatever came in the morning. But sleep felt impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the smoke. He heard the alarms. He heard Arthur's voice commanding him to move. He heard Elena's cough. There was a knock at the door. Marcos froze. He was not expecting anyone. He walked to the door slowly, his heart pounding. "Who is it?" he asked. "Delivery," a voice said. Marcos opened the chain lock and peeked through the crack. It was a courier service. He opened the door and took the envelope. It was thick, heavy. Legal paper. He closed the door and locked it again. He sat on the bed and opened it. It was a copy of the restraining order. It was a notice of asset freeze. Arthur was moving fast. He was securing Elena's future by dismantling Marcos's present. The documents listed everything. The joint accounts, the property, the insurance policies. All frozen, pending investigation. Marcos dropped the papers on the bed. He was financially strangled. He could not fight this. He did not have the resources. Arthur had ensured that. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The faint stain of water damage looked like a cloud. He thought about the baby. Elena had said it kicked during the fire. He wondered if the child would know him one day. Would Elena tell the child the truth? Would she say his father was a coward? He hoped she would not. He hoped she would say he was a mistake. A mistake could be forgiven. A coward could not. He rolled onto his side and curled up. The room was cold. He pulled the thin blanket over himself. He thought about calling his mother. But what would he say? That he had destroyed his life, that he had endangered his own child? He could not speak the words. He turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the glow of the television. In the silence, the reality settled over him like a heavy coat. He was not the protagonist of this story anymore. He was the cautionary tale. He was the man who chose wrong. He thought about Clara again. Why had she not called? Was she hiding too, or had she decided he was not worth the risk? He realized that their relationship had been built on secrecy and thrill. Now that the thrill was gone, only the risk remained. And she was not willing to take it. He was truly alone. The phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "Stop trying to contact us. It is over." He knew it was from Arthur's security team. They were watching him. They knew he was trying to reach out. They were warning him to stay away. He turned the phone off. He could not bear to see any more messages. He lay in the dark, listening to the traffic outside. Somewhere, Elena was waking up. Somewhere, she was eating breakfast prepared by her father. Somewhere, she was planning a future that did not include him. The thought was painful, but it was also a relief. She was safe. That was the only good thing that had come from this nightmare. She was safe, and he was paying the price. He closed his eyes and finally, exhaustion took him. He slept fitfully, dreaming of locked doors and burning halls. He dreamed of a child crying for a father who did not come. He woke up sweating, the sun already rising outside. The new day had come. The legal battle would begin today. The papers would be filed. The press would swarm. Moment, listening to the silence of the room. It was a heavy, curated silence, insulated from the chaos of the world outside. She could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft footsteps of her father moving in the living area. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the familiar warmth there. The baby was quiet, resting as she was. She took a deep breath, testing her lungs. The tightness was gone, replaced by a lingering soreness that served as a physical reminder of the smoke, but the fear that had gripped her chest in the hospital had subsided. She was safe here. The walls were thick, the locks were electronic, and the people who managed the building were vetted by her father's team. She sat up and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by the pregnancy and the exhaustion of the trauma, but she was stable. She walked to the connecting door and opened it. Arthur was sitting at the dining table, surrounded by papers and laptops, but he looked up immediately when he heard the door click. His eyes scanned her, checking for any sign of distress. "Good morning," he said softly, standing up. He walked over to her, not hugging her yet, just assessing. "Did you sleep?" Elena nodded. "Yes. No dreams." Arthur let out a small breath of relief. "That is good. The nurse will be here in 10 minutes. Dr. Evans. She is bringing the portable ultrasound machine. I want to be sure everything is still stable after the move." Elena touched her arm instinctively. "I feel okay, Dad. But I know. We check." Arthur guided her to the sofa. Sit. Rest. You do not need to stand yet. Elena sat on the plush velvet couch, pulling a throw blanket over her legs. She watched her father move around the room. He was orchestrating her safety with the same precision he used to manage his business empire. Every variable was controlled. The food was prepared in a separate kitchen to avoid tampering. The water was bottled and sealed. The phones were encrypted. It was a fortress, and she was the prize being protected. She felt a pang of guilt for needing so much protection, but it was quickly drowned out by gratitude. She remembered the ballroom. She remembered the heat. She remembered the feeling of being abandoned. Here, she was not abandoned. She was the center of gravity. The doorbell chimed softly. Arthur moved to answer it, but 2 security guards checked the peephole first. They nodded to Arthur, and he opened the door. Dr. Evans entered, carrying a sleek medical bag. She was a woman of few words, recommended by the hospital's chief of staff. She greeted Elena with a warm smile that did not reach her eyes. She was all business. Good morning, Elena, she said. I hear we had a scare. Elena nodded. Just a checkup, please. I need to hear it. Dr. Evans set up the machine on the coffee table. She asked Elena to lift her sweater. The gel was cold on her skin, making her flinch slightly. Arthur stood behind the sofa, his hand resting on the backrest, close enough to touch her shoulder if she needed it. Dr. Evans moved the transducer over Elena's abdomen. The screen flickered to life. There it is, Dr. Evans said, pointing to the rhythmic flashing on the monitor. The sound filled the room, a rapid, strong gallop. 140 beats per minute. Perfect. Elena closed her eyes, listening. The sound was the anchor she needed. It proved that despite the smoke, despite the fire, despite the betrayal, life continued. The baby was resilient. Open your eyes, Arthur said gently. Look. Elena opened them. The image was grainy but clear enough to see the small shape curled in the womb. She reached out and touched the screen. She is strong, Elena whispered. She is a Vance, Arthur replied. There is steel in this family. Dr. Evans cleaned the gel off Elena's skin and packed her bag. You are physically clear, she said. The smoke inhalation was minor. No lasting damage to the lungs. But the stress, that is the danger. You need quiet. No visitors. No press. No confrontation. Elena looked at her father. I don't want any of that. I just want to be quiet. Then that is what you will have, Arthur said. Dr. Evans nodded. I will leave the monitoring equipment. Call me if anything changes. Anything at all. After the nurse left, the room felt smaller again. Arthur sat in the chair opposite Elena. He picked up his tablet. There is news, he said. His voice was careful. Elena stiffened. About Marcos, Arthur nodded. They arrested him an hour ago. At the motel. He did not resist. Elena looked down at her hands. She did not feel joy, but she did not feel sadness either. She felt a strange numbness. What are the charges, she asked. Arson, conspiracy. Endangerment. Fraud. Arthur scrolled through the document. Clara has been picked up as well. She tried to flee the state at the airport. They caught her at security. Elena let out a long breath. It was over. The people who had tried to hurt her were behind bars. The threat was neutralized. But the numbness remained. Justice did not erase the memory of the flames. It did not.